On the 12th of February, 1945, at exactly 47 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, amid the forested hills close to Epernay, France, a 22-year-old American foot soldier by the name of Jack Bigham was pressed firmly against the frigid ground. He served as a sniper in the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, a component of the 4th Infantry Division of the United States Army. The atmosphere of the late winter was dense with the smell of cordite and moist pine. In his grasp, he held a Springfield M190304 rifle, the regulation American sniper firearm of the conflict, yet it possessed a single, highly unconventional characteristic. The scope attached to it was not of military specification. It was a device he had constructed himself. His comrades in arms had chuckled upon seeing it. An optic fashioned from a damaged medical microscope. A metal ring from a taken-apart German artillery fuse was used to secure it. Its dials were marked by hand with graphite notches. The whole thing appeared absurd, amateur. They referred to it as a toy. They labeled Jack as delusional. Some went so far as to say he would get himself eliminated while attempting to act like an engineer on the front lines. However, now, a mere 27 seconds afterward, those very same men observed as a German Panzer IV tank, located more than 1,200 yards distant, which is roughly 1,100 meters, abruptly burst into flames. The detonation resounded throughout the valley. It was not an artillery strike. It was not an aerial assault. It was a single man, a single bullet, and a single self-made scope. They stopped laughing. This is the authentic and incredible account of Jack "Red" Bigham, the American soldier who was ridiculed for creating his own sniper optic right up to the instant he employed it to alter the outcome of a battle. It is a tale of skepticism, ingenuity, and the one unbelievable shot that became a part of history. Blueprints in the dirt. During the winter of 1944, while the final significant German offensive, remembered as the Battle of the Bulge, tore through the Ardennes, the soldiers of the 4th Infantry Division of the United States Army were freezing, weary, and advancing slowly toward the east. By the start of February in 1945, the battle line had shifted into the Champagne-Ardenne area of northeastern France. There, within the undulating hills and thick woodlands near Epernay, the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, often referred to as simply 23, was given a formidable mission: to reconnoiter and diminish the German fortifications established just past the Bois de Laine Ridge. Among these men was a reserved young foot soldier named Jack Bigham. He hailed from Marshall, Kansas, a rural town with a population of less than 10,000. Prior to the war, Jack had never wielded a rifle in a combat situation. He was a mechanic by profession and a tinkerer by nature. At the age of 19, he had been an apprentice to his uncle in a watch repair business. He could reassemble a stopwatch with his eyes shut, his hands unwavering, adjusting the minute gears with such accuracy that elderly clients would jest, "He must have nerves of steel." When Jack was conscripted in the spring of 1943, these very abilities made him notable at Fort Benning. In the course of marksmanship practice, he made an impression on his trainers not only with his aim, but also with his technique. He compensated for wind and elevation without instruction. He estimated distances in his mind by using trees, fence lines, and even shadows. But with no official sniper program established and a scarcity of scopes available, Jack was designated as a standard rifleman. By the conclusion of the Battle of the Bulge in January of 1945, the Army had started to acknowledge its deficiency in trained sharpshooters. A great number of its scopes, like the Weaver Model 330C, were either broken, fogged over, or had simply vanished. Replenishment was challenging. Within 23, there were a mere 3 scoped rifles for the whole battalion. Jack perceived this issue as a chance. In early February, while positioned near Epernay, Jack discreetly requested permission to go to the battalion's field hospital. There, he recovered a broken microscope, an American-made Bosch and Lahm model that had been fractured during shipment. He utilized the lens tube to craft an optical sight. For the mounting hardware, he repurposed a steel ring from an exploded German 88mm shell casing. Over the course of 2 nights, he soldered, filed, and affixed the device onto the barrel of his standard-issue Springfield M1903A4. When he presented it to his squad, they erupted in laughter. "That device looks like it should be at a science fair," one commented. "Hey, Big Gum, are you planning to diagnose a microbe or shoot a German?" another quipped. The platoon sergeant even brushed it off with a shrug. "It is not regulation. Do not come to me in tears when it breaks on your first shot." But Jack remained unfazed. He had faith in the tool because he had made it with his own hands. He had verified its range in the woods just to the west of their camp, observing tree lines and checking for consistency. The scope was not flawless. The view had a slight blue coloration. The lens was easily scratched, and the 0 point shifted with fluctuations in temperature, but it functioned. It provided magnification. It aligned properly. And crucially, it was the sole scope he had access to. He was not aiming to be a hero. He was aiming to be of use. Within the command structure of the American Army in 1945, innovation typically flowed from the highest levels downward. Jack Bigham was on the verge of demonstrating the contrary, that sometimes in conflict, the most vital advancements are conceived not in research labs or manufacturing plants, but in the mud, under enemy fire, and by the hands of a quiet young man who declined to accept what was standard issue. 1,200 yards of doubt. Jack Bigham did not request authorization to construct his scope. He was wise enough not to. In the military, improvisation was not supported unless it originated from the high command. But what he did ask for, quietly and with respect, was time. Time in the evening. Time by himself. Time to create something superior to what he had been given, which was absolutely nothing. During those early February nights of 1945, Jack toiled under a canvas shelter just past the tree line west of Epernay. He muffled the sound of his metal tools by wrapping his equipment in burlap and oilcloth. His flashlight was covered with red cellophane taken from a medic's signal kit. He recorded notes in a small ledger, figuring out distances, crosswind effects, and corrections for temperature variations. He was systematic, meticulous, and focused. He disassembled the microscope tube into its 3 primary parts: the objective lens, the focus ring, and the eyepiece. He then secured the system to the receiver of the Springfield rifle with 2 handcrafted rings fastened by salvaged bolts. The vertical crosshair was manually painted, using a single filament of wire taken from a field telephone line and stretched over a ring of dental cement. It was not aesthetically pleasing, but it was accurate. Each evening after sunset, Jack would proceed to a clearing called Red Hill, so named not for bloodshed, but for its iron-rich earth. There, he would practice. He placed rusted helmets on fence posts at varying distances, initially at 200 yards, then 400, then 6. Every night, he positioned himself a little further away. He took notes, calculated the angle of bullet drop, and monitored how his homemade lens performed in the cold. The scope would fog up slightly in the freezing air, but he discovered a remedy. He applied a thin layer of soap to the inner glass and then polished it away. It was effective enough. Jack did not converse much with the others during these training sessions. They were aware of his whereabouts. Some observed from a distance, finding it amusing. Others paid him no mind. His platoon sergeant gave him one stern warning. "You are squandering ammunition we do not possess." Jack offered a single reply. "Sir, I will return them clean." By the 10th of an infantryman, being caught exposed by a panzer was a certain death. The typical response was air support anti-tank guns, or bazookas launched from a short distance. A rifle, even a sniper rifle, stood no chance against it. But Jack did not intend to penetrate armor. He had examined the schematics of the Panzer IV. He was familiar with the layout. He knew that the engine deck at the back contained the fuel intake caps, which were frequently left uncovered when refueling hastily. He had observed on more than one occasion spare fuel containers attached to the rear of German armored convoys. It was standard procedure, convenient for access, but also exposed. If he could target that, not the main body, not the turret, but a soft, unprotected area, he might not demolish the tank immediately, but he could ignite it, compel it to halt, force the crew to abandon it, and sow confusion. That would suffice. His strategy was not irrational. It was deliberate, but no one had faith in it. Not at that point. With the enemy making headway, by the 11th of February, 1945, the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Infantry Regiment had reached the edge of the Bois de l'Aisne, a section of forest that provided a view of a shallow valley near the Marne River. The 4th Infantry Division was under orders to break through German lines, neutralize the remaining pockets of resistance, and capture high ground for the forthcoming spring offensive into Germany. But something was amiss. Observers noted an increase in armored vehicle activity on a dirt track that wound through the trees. It was tight, muddy, and mostly hidden from aerial view, ideal for relocating tanks without attracting notice. Intelligence verified it. A minimum of 3 Panzer IV tanks were fortified along the western boundary of the forest, operating in rotations every 6 hours. The Germans were girding for a defensive stand. That morning, at a command meeting, Lieutenant Colonel Harris addressed his platoon leaders with an exceptional request. He required a sharpshooter in position by the next dawn, someone silent, composed, and acquainted with the local geography. The objective was straightforward, yet perilous. Monitor and, if feasible, interfere with German vehicle movements without directly confronting infantry. Create disarray, eliminate officers, and cause a delay. A single name was suggested: Big Gum. Jack was called to the command tent, where Harris scrutinized him as one would inspect a piece of gear that was not entirely trusted. "I hear you have been dabbling in science with a rifle," Harris remarked. "Yes, sir." "Do you believe that contraption of yours can strike anything beyond 400 yards?" "I am certain it can, sir." Harris did not acknowledge with a nod. He did not grin. He simply gave Jack a map and marked a location designated as Grid 17 Alpha, an elevated cluster of pine trees approximately 1,200 yards from the presumed German tank emplacements. It offered an unobstructed line of sight, but it was a distant shot, farther than regulation, farther than doctrine advised. "You will move in before first light. No support, no sound, no second opportunities." "Yes, sir." That evening, Jack packed minimally. His Springfield rifle with the self-made scope, 40 rounds of match-grade ammunition, all individually chosen for consistency, a pair of wire cutters, 2 canteens, 1 bar of chocolate, and no sidearm. He did not anticipate having to fight his way out. As dusk fell, he set out on his own, traversing the frost-laden field toward Grid 17 Alpha. He arrived at the ridge just after midnight and excavated a shallow hiding spot for himself beneath a toppled pine tree. Overhead, the moon shone through a light layer of clouds, creating long, silvery shadows among the treetops. The night was eerily silent. No insects, no breeze, only the far-off sound of artillery and the sporadic report of a German machine gun far to the east. Jack fine-tuned his scope. He carved notches into a branch above him to monitor the shifting wind. He calculated the distance using fence posts and the breadth of the valley floor. He rechecked the tightness of the mounting rings. Everything was secure and aligned. He lay in a prone position, completely still, for almost 6 hours. Just before daybreak, A plume of smoke became visible on the horizon. The Panzer was on the move, slow and deliberate. It came out from the trees and stopped just past the ridgeline. Steam hissed from its exhaust. A crew member, without a helmet, likely the loader, got out and started to refuel from an external jerry can fastened to the rear hull. It was precisely the moment Jack had been anticipating. One error, one exposed container, one opportunity. He let out a slow breath. 1,200 yards. A target no larger than a lunchbox. Less than 3 seconds of exposure. He steadied the crosshairs. His finger shifted to the trigger. The world became silent. The trigger that changed everything. 1,200 yards, which is 1,100 meters, nearly 3/4 of a mile, across a muddy French valley veiled in the early morning mist. No observer, no assistance, no assurance. Just a single man, a single rifle, and a single makeshift scope. Jack Bigham controlled his breathing. His body was motionless, but his thoughts were racing. He could now see the tank. It was clearly visible in the cold morning light, a German Panzer IV Ausführung H, caked in mud and frost. Its 75mm cannon was aimed slightly down as it sat idling. Behind it, 2 crew members were refueling from a canister attached to the rear hull. They worked with haste, believing they were out of harm's way. The American front line was more than a kilometer off. No one would risk a shot from such a distance. Jack's eyes narrowed. He was not targeting the tank's turret or its body. That would be futile. The Panzer's armor, 80 millimeters thick at the front, was more than capable of deflecting a rifle bullet. Even from a high-velocity .30 caliber Springfield, the projectile would flatten like a piece of metal. But Jack was not attempting to break through steel. He was targeting something soft, something combustible. He had researched this. German refueling practices were often hurried, particularly under duress. If the crew failed to tighten the cap or spilled even a small amount of fuel near the intake, it could ignite. And if that fire reached the ammunition stored close to the engine compartment, then even a rifle round could set off something much more catastrophic. He lined up the reticle. The hand-painted wire stretched across his view like a cross of light. The wind had subsided. Just a gentle breeze from the west, perhaps 3 miles per hour. He corrected for the drift. A 1/4-inch deviation to the left at the muzzle would result in being several feet off target at that range. He took one breath, held it, and gently squeezed the trigger. The recoil pushed softly into his shoulder. The sound of the shot echoed across the valley, and for a brief instant, nothing occurred. Then, it did. A spark, a hiss, a blossoming orange flame. The jerry can was the first to explode, dousing the crew in burning fuel. One of them let out a scream. The other attempted to flee. Flames climbed up the back of the tank, catching on the engine cover, then spreading inward. And then, with a sound like thunder trapped within a metal container, the ammunition inside the Panzer detonated. The tank exploded from the rear, a massive fireball erupting upward into the pine-dotted sky. Bigham remained still. His finger released the trigger. He observed as smoke billowed into the morning light, and chaos broke out among the nearby German soldiers, who scrambled to figure out what had just transpired. Some pointed, while others sought cover. No one could pinpoint the origin of the shot. It was too distant, too precise. Back on the American side, soldiers from 23 looked on in shocked silence. They had heard the single gunshot. Then, they witnessed the fire, followed by the explosion. Initially, no one spoke. Then a corporal said under his breath, "Impossible. That could not have been Bigham, could it?" Another responded, "He is the only one positioned out there." By the time Jack made his way back into the cover of the trees hours later, his hands were chapped from the cold. His face was flecked with dirt. He appeared utterly drained. And upon his return to the forward operating post, there was no laughter, no derision. They glanced at the rifle, then at the scope, then at him. No medals, no formal recognition, just a quiet sense of wonder. Jack Bigham had just executed an impossible shot with a rifle that no one had confidence in and a scope that no one had believed in. He uttered not a word. He did not need to. When the mocking stopped, when Jack Bigham got back to the base that afternoon, the conflict around him remained the same. But something else had shifted. The manner in which people regarded him, the inflection in their voices, the quiet that had taken the place of the usual sarcasm. The man they had previously called Scope Boy or Optics, Jack now moved among them with a silent seriousness. Not because he had demanded respect, but because he had earned it. The news traveled quickly. Within a few hours, Lieutenant Colonel Harris got a communication from battalion headquarters. German radio communications had picked up a suspected American sniper strike on an armored vehicle. The Panzer, that had been engulfed in flames, its serial number not known, had been a component of a mobile counteroffensive unit intended to stop the 4th Infantry's advance to the east. It never had the opportunity. Jack's shot had disabled that effort, and by doing so, it had caused a chain reaction. The German tank crews started to alter their protocols. Fuel canisters were now kept further away from the rear deck. Refueling was postponed until the vehicles were under protective cover. Hatches were kept shut unless it was absolutely essential. That type of change does not arise from a mere rumor. It arises from fear. The command staff at 23 summoned Jack for a debriefing the following morning. The officers sought to know every detail. His method, his calculations, his scope. He brought it with him. The self-made optic was now slightly discolored from residue and frost. He detailed how he had utilized a broken Bosch and LAM microscope, how he had calibrated it through a process of match marks and trial and error, and how he had fashioned his reticle from a single strand of wire extracted from a communications line. They recorded his words, taking actual notes. For the very first time, people were paying attention. Lieutenant Colonel Harris leaned in and asked directly, "Could you instruct others in this?" Jack answered without delay. "Yes, sir." The following week, he was given a temporary reassignment to division-level training, not on a permanent basis, just for long enough to impart his techniques to a select few riflemen from throughout the 4th Infantry. His instructions were straightforward but impactful. Improvise with accuracy. Calculate everything. Rely on your gut feelings, but confirm them with hard data. One of the sergeants, who had previously made fun of Jack, requested to borrow the scope simply to peer through it. Jack obliged. The man raised it to the light, scowled, and then returned it. "This thing is unattractive," he said quietly. "But damn, it is effective." Back in the camp, the story extended beyond their own unit. Another battalion dispatched a messenger to inquire if Jack could showcase his method. A major from the division staff appeared without warning, requesting a formal summary. It appeared that no one could comprehend the fact that a homemade scope, constructed in the forest with scavenged materials and solder, had accomplished what no regulation sniper rifle had ever achieved in that area. It had halted a tank, not by destroying it with sheer power, but by outsmarting it. Jack did not boast. It was not in his nature. He remained to himself, as he always had. He dedicated his evenings to rechecking the scope, cleaning the bolt, and tracing his fingers over the cold steel barrel like a mechanic examining a car's engine. He understood better than anyone else. He was not pursuing fame. He was pursuing dependability. The rifle, the scope, and the shot had merged into a single narrative, his narrative. And although he never sought any form of acknowledgement, the Army was now observing him intently. Because in a conflict dominated by machines and mass manufacturing, Jack Bigham had demonstrated something timeless: that sometimes the most formidable weapon is not what you are provided, but what you construct with your own two hands. The war ends, but the legacy begins. The conflict would persist for another 3 months. In May of 1945, Nazi Germany capitulated. The sound of gunfire ceased across Europe. The cities were left in ruins. The landscapes in areas like Champagne, Normandy, and the Ardennes were strewn with corroding steel and memories that had seeped into the ground. For the majority of soldiers, including Jack Bigham, there was no large-scale ceremony, no poignant farewell, only directives. Directives to gather their belongings, go back to their homes, and forget, or attempt to forget, what they had witnessed. Jack returned to Kansas in the summer of that year. The community of Marshall offered him a subdued welcome. His parents had preserved his workshop just as he had left it. The same instruments, the same non-functional watches, a notebook still lying open on the table, with a note in pencil. 3 seconds drift at 500 yards. He seldom discussed his experiences overseas. When acquaintances inquired, he would offer a polite smile and state, "I fulfilled my duty." That was sufficient. But the rifle returned with him, the Springfield M19034, along with the self-made scope, still marked with scratches, still held together with wire and adhesive. It remained in a secured cabinet for many years, undisturbed. In the 1950s, Jack received an invitation to address a local assembly of veterans. He brought the scope and rifle, not for the purpose of boasting, but to illustrate what a person could achieve with a proper drive and a determined mindset. The attendees listened in silence as he recounted the tale, not only of the shot but also of the derision, the setbacks, and the persistence. He concluded with a statement that would later be inscribed on a brass plaque beside his exhibit in the Regional War Museum. "It was never about the scope. It was about believing that I could create something better, even when no one else shared that belief with me." The Army did not officially implement Jack's design, but his story found its way into the unwritten tradition of infantry sharpshooting. During the Korean War, and even in Vietnam, trainers would sometimes share with new soldiers the story of the Kansas farm boy who constructed his own scope and disabled a tank. The specifics were frequently embellished, as is common with war stories, but the central truth was preserved. One soldier's readiness to approach a problem differently had produced a tangible result. In the late 1970s, a military historian conducting research on improvised armaments from World War II located Jack. They conversed for several hours. Jack presented the scope to him, now kept in a cushioned container lined with soft fabric. The historian took detailed notes and subsequently included a chapter in a little-known publication titled "Tools of Last Resort: Ingenuity in Combat." In that same year, Jack contributed the scope and rifle to the Kansas Military History Center. It remains there to this day, displayed in a glass enclosure beneath a faded picture of a young man with a strong jaw, resolute eyes, and fingers stained with grease. The majority of patrons pass by it without a second glance, but a few pause. They move closer, peruse the description, follow the marks in the steel, and in that instant, they grasp the significance. This was not the account of a war hero adorned with medals and celebrated with great ceremony. It was the account of a reserved mechanic who would not acknowledge the word impossible. Jack Bigham did not actively pursue a legacy, but he created one nonetheless. How one bullet changed doctrine. Jack Bigham did not view himself as a military planner. He did not have stars on his uniform or participate in high-level strategy sessions, drawing lines on maps. He was a corporal, a man on the ground, a marksman who simply had a different perspective on equipment. But on occasion, the course of history is altered not by strategists, but by those who put plans into action. In the months that followed the Panzer incident, Jack's story was quietly shared through the communication networks of the 4th Infantry Division, eventually finding its way into after-action summaries and field assessments. Although it was never formally integrated into official doctrine, its consequences were difficult to overlook. Firstly, the Army came to understand that it had misjudged the value of innovation in the field. Jack had taken broken components, a damaged microscope, steel from artillery shells, discarded wire, and transformed them into a functional device under combat conditions. This, in itself, was a testament to his resourcefulness. Secondly, he had exposed a tactical weak point. The majority of sniper training at that time focused on personnel targets, officers, machine gun positions, and forward observers. The idea that a sniper could impact armored combat was rarely considered. Jack had demonstrated that, under particular circumstances, a precisely aimed rifle shot could disrupt or even neutralize a vehicle if the target was not its armor, but a vulnerability located behind it. As a result, several after-action analyses started to advocate for more comprehensive sniper training, which would include the identification of weak points on enemy machinery. A brief addendum was included in a post-war field manual in the late 1940s. Personnel should be trained to identify and exploit exposed support elements of mechanized units when conditions permit. It did not credit Jack by name, but that instruction was a direct result of his shot. Thirdly, Jack's achievement sparked renewed discussions about sniper doctrine itself. During World War II, the U.S. military had lagged behind both the Soviets and the Germans in the area of sniper development. The Soviets had deployed over 20,000 trained snipers by the conclusion of the war. The Germans were renowned for their accuracy and the superiority of their optics. In contrast, the American strategy was fragmented, inconsistent, and highly reliant on whichever equipment happened to be on hand at the moment. Jack's self-made scope, as rudimentary as it was, compelled officers to consider a more fundamental question. What if we enabled soldiers to innovate on the front lines instead of waiting for solutions to come from the top down? In the 1950s, the Army started to make more substantial investments in the standardization of optics and sniper training initiatives. By the time of the Vietnam War, snipers were no longer considered a minor asset. They were a strategic resource. Rifles were improved, optics were sharper, doctrine was more refined. No, Jack Bigham did not accomplish all of this single-handedly. But he had established a crucial point: that battlefield intelligence was not solely about collecting data. It was about acknowledging when the battlefield itself required a new approach. Today, in contemporary military training courses, soldiers continue to learn about the vulnerabilities of vehicles. They are instructed to think critically under duress, to find unconventional solutions, and, in certain situations, to create their own gear when official supplies are unavailable. These lessons did not originate from theory. They came from a man in a forest in France who refused to accept that standard issue was the only available choice. One shot, one scope, one quiet act of defying doctrine, and from it, a consequence that would resonate through subsequent generations of marksmen, engineers, and soldiers who learned to understand. Accuracy is not always determined by the instrument. Sometimes, it is determined by the resolve behind it. In every conflict, there are names inscribed on memorials, generals, battles, victories, dates. But history is also formed in less conspicuous moments, not with great celebration, not with prominent headlines, but with a single choice, a single self-made solution, a single act of defiance that no one anticipated. Jack Bigham never spoke loudly. He never authored a book or presented himself as a hero. He did not seek medals, nor did he aim to reform the Army. Yet, his story, one man, one rifle, one improvised scope, forces us to reconsider our understanding of bravery, expertise, and innovation under duress. His defining moment did not occur in a dramatic display of glory. It arrived in stillness, in control, in a quiet conviction that he could perceive what others did not and strike what others deemed impossible. The reality is, most of us are instructed to adhere to the rules, to conform, to await authorization. And yet, every significant advancement in history, in science, in warfare, in human development has originated from someone who determined, "This is not sufficient. I can improve it." Jack's self-made scope was not merely a technical accomplishment. It was a declaration that concepts are important, even if they seem absurd initially. That persistence is frequently ridiculed right up to the point of its success. That at times, the only thing separating a failure from a breakthrough is the determination to proceed regardless. Consider the environment he was in: mud, terror, steel. A setting where conformity is a means of survival. And in that setting, this man, with nothing more than a fractured microscope and a steel ring from enemy munitions, altered the outcome of a battle, not by adhering to orders, but by thinking beyond them. We now live in an era where technology is all around us, where accuracy is engineered, where tools are mass-produced, digital, and precise. And yet the spirit that motivated Jack Bigham is more pertinent than ever, because we still encounter obstacles that cannot be overcome with conventional thinking. Problems that demand someone with the resolve to say, "I will construct it myself. I will find a way." Perhaps that person is you. Perhaps you have been informed that your concept is unworkable, that it appears peculiar, that it is a squandering of time, that things are not done that way. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the very reason you ought to persist. Jack's story serves as a reminder that innovation is not a division. It is a state of mind. And sometimes, the most minor alteration in the hands of a determined individual can have a far-reaching impact that no one could have foreseen. One man, one lens, one bullet, and an instant that still resonates with us 80 years later. What about your perspective? Which element of Jack Bigham's story had the greatest impact on you? Was it the ridicule he endured? The silence that followed the shot? The legacy he was not expected to leave? Or perhaps it is the question that lies beneath the surface of his life story. What would you create if you ceased to wait for approval? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Your perspective is valuable. Your story might be the next one that deserves to be shared. And if this account resonated with you, pass it on. Because somewhere, another individual is holding their own version of that self-made scope, questioning if it is adequate. Perhaps your faith in them is the signal they have been anticipating. Thank you for your time.